At times, it looks like the eerie landscape of a distant planet. But looking closer, Flathead Lake reveals itself in the midst of winter. Flathead Lake is 38 miles long, 15 miles wide, 396 feet deep, and covers 126,000 surface acres. With 185 miles of shoreline, it is hard to imagine that a lake this size could freeze over, but it does, about once every 15 years. As the ice jams begin to form, the water from the Swan River continues its flow into Big Fork Bay, which empties into Flathead Lake. The steel bridge in the village of Big Fork is located at approximately 2,900 feet. The bay is about to freeze for the winter, and the flow of water under the ice travels beneath the Swan River Bridge on Highway 35 and into Flathead Lake. These little quackers forgot to fly south for the winter. Maybe it's time for our feathered friends to look for some more stable ground. Many species of waterfowl make their homes around Flathead Lake. The ducks, geese, osprey, cranes, and eagles have plenty to share in and around the lake with hawks, falcons, and owls. The ice blanket moves south, covering more and more acres of water daily. This pier stands isolated 6 feet out of the water because Flathead Lake has been lowered for the winter in order to accommodate the massive runoff from the three forks of the Flathead River and the Swan River in the spring. While these ducks are still trying to get their bearings as to which direction is south, the ice has started building up along the shoreline where the Swan River flows into Flathead Lake. The Flathead River continues its cold journey out of the Montana Rocky Mountains. It is nourished by three forks. The North Fork from Canada that flows along the west boundary of Glacier National Park. The South Fork, which starts in the Bob Marshall Wilderness area and fills the Hungry Horse Reservoir before merging with the Middle Fork, which also begins in the Bob Marshall but travels mostly in the Great Bear Wilderness Territory. This is the Swan River Dam and Spillway. The water that flows here into Big Fork Bay comes from the snowpack of the Mission Mountain Range and the Bob Marshall Wilderness region. It surges under the old steel bridge into the Bay of Big Fork and then into the Flathead Lake. The mountains store millions of acres of snowpack that liquefies in the spring and starts feeding the tributaries that fill Flathead Lake. The spring runoff of the Swan River is one in particular, as it makes passage into Big Fork Bay. The only road link across the Swan River to Big Fork from the south was made in 1911 by this bridge. Prior to its completion, only a ferry could bring people or supplies. Quaint homes are nestled near the river in Big Fork, along with some of the finest restaurants in the Flathead Valley. Located around Big Fork Bay and the northeast shore of Flathead Lake, Big Fork is a charming village by the bay. In 1889, Everett L. Slider was on a fishing and hunting trip in the area and was so inspired by the scenic beauty that he bought 140 acres of land. During the next 10 years, he planted orchards, built a hotel, and served as postmaster. In 1901, Slider planted 94 lots in the village of Big Fork, and he was only 35. Today, Big Fork is an art and cultural center that features many galleries and gift shops. It's springtime, and Big Fork is just waking up from a long winter as the tourists begin to arrive. The Center for the Performing Arts is a beautiful theater that features a summer playhouse, and during the winter, the community players perform, and the Northwest Ballet presents the Nutcracker during Christmas. This is the Big Fork Inn.
And this is the Swan River during the Whitewater Festival.
The festival is an annual event that happens the third weekend of May. In 1976, Fritz Gronke put up $100 in prize money to have the first organized race. 11 kayakers showed up. Today, there can be as many as 150 rubber-suited racers. Kayak racing down one of the most dangerous stretches of raging white water in America is why the festival is so popular. It's called the Wild Mile. The deafening roar of the river and kayakers risking their lives is enough to capture anyone's attention. The kayak is a canoe of Eskimo origin. It is propelled with a double-bladed paddle. The kayak has a sharp bow and stern and no keel. Eskimo kayaks are built by shrinking seal or other animal skins over a wooden frame. They are used for hunting because of their noiseless approach. Modern kayaks are made of plastic and fiberglass. In 1865, John McGregor, a sportsman and traveler, fashioned a deck canoe derived from the kayak of an Eskimo. In the United States, the term canoe is usually reserved for the open canoe. The term kayak is used for decked paddling canoes. Looks like a member of the rescue team is going in to save a kayaker. Sometimes a kayak gets caught in a swirling mass of water called a back eddy or wash. There's not much this man can do except drop a rope and hope. The kayaker can pull the craft out of the whirlpool. In this situation, they will be lucky to get the rescuer out alive. Smile, you're on wounded cam. This man was caught by our wounded cam, and he's still standing after surviving a major dunk in the river. In 1865, John McGregor designed a deck traveling canoe, which he named Rob Roy, and in it, he made a journey of the waterways of Europe. The first Rob Roy had a length of 15 feet and a beam of 30 inches with paddles, mast, and sail. It weighed 90 pounds. McGregor's following canoes were shorter and carried a mast and sail inside the cockpit in order to be able to make use of favorable winds. The Rob Roy canoes achieved great popularity, and soon racing models were developed called single streaks. Between 1920 and 1930 came rapid developments from Scandinavia for racing and touring kayaks. Now we are at the bottom of the Wild Mile, where the Swan River empties into Big Fork Bay. It's a lot quieter here, peaceful and serene. The crystal blue waters reflect the village of Big Fork at an elevation of 2,892 feet. The Marina Cay is a condominium-style resort with a marina. The Marina Cay does private parties and special events. Today, they are catering a wedding reception. As we began our journey heading south along the east shore of Highway 35, our first stop is the Wayfarers State Park. Here is a 69-acre campground nestled in a conifer forest. There are 30 campsites available. Wayfarers has a boat ramp and dock. The rocky cliffs and outcroppings offer great places to fish from or watch the best sunsets in the valley. The rocks are a result of glacial activity that formed this lake thousands of years ago. Fishing is good in the Flathead Lake. Kokanee salmon, lake trout, rainbow trout, and whitefish all make their home in Flathead Lake. Next on the tour is Flathead Lake Lodge. Mark Wilson of the Big Fork Eagle wrote this about Flathead Lake Lodge. When Les Averill was discharged from the U.S. Air Force after World War II, he had $5,000 in savings and a vision. He combined the two plus tons of hard work and cowboy charm to build Big Fork's Flathead Lake Lodge. The Dude Ranch recently celebrated its 50th anniversary and is Montana's only 4-star mobile resort. Reservations for week-long stays need to be made up to 2 years in advance. The lodge is over 2,000 acres and has the best of everything: a fine herd of horses, gourmet dining, a fleet of 26 motorized and sailboats, tennis courts, barn dances, fishing, its own buffalo herd, and a heated swimming pool. excellent wine list, and emphasis on family vacations, plus no televisions. The lodge owns 2 Q-Class 51 racing sloops that offer wonderful sailing experiences. This cowboy bronze was created by Deborah Fellows, a local Big Fork artist. In the early 1950s, the construction of the Hungry Horse Dam near Columbia Falls helped the lodge's business considerably. Hungry Horse, which dams the South Fork of the Flathead River, was the largest dam in the world, and dignitaries came from all over the country to see it and stayed at the lodge as the Interior Department guest. And if riding horses is not your cup of tea, the Flathead Lake Lodge does offer rides on the one bringing up the rear here. I guess he thinks he's a colt instead of a goat. Now, here's a colt. The Flathead Valley has numerous horse ranches around the lake. It's springtime, and the cherry blossoms are starting to bloom. With the coming of spring, some years it means high water and floods. This may not be exactly the waterfront property you were looking for. Before we continue south on Highway 35, let's visit with Kelly Nelson at the Spring Creek Ostrich Ranch. Here Kelly plays with her kids. Hang on, her goat is about to eat my fingers. Nope, he's hit the pause button. Let me reposition my camera, I'll be right back. Anyway, it's a 20-acre ostrich ranch near Summers on the northwest side of Flathead Lake that Kelly and her husband John own and operate. They raise ostriches, and when these birds get 1 year old, they become table fare. It's a popular red meat that's low in cholesterol and fat. The feathers are also used for cleaning computer parts and decorative purposes. This gives a whole new meaning to the term high five.
Now we are back on Highway 35, heading south along the East Shore route. Keep alert, the elk farm is on our right. The elk is also called Wapiti, a Shawnee Indian name. The elk originated in Asia and came east to North America across the Bering Land Bridge.
Woods Bay is named after the first pioneers to homestead between Big Fork and Finley Point. J.C. Wood and his family came here in 1891. Mrs. J.C. Wood was the first person to conceive of the idea of growing cherries in the area, and her husband planted the first cherry trees. Wood's cherries were even shipped all the way to New York. Many fruit ranches began in this area. One of the growers was Robert Smith, and he was elected governor in 1896. Smith built a large dock in front of his place for shipping fruit for the Woods Bay growers. The dock was destroyed by ice in 1936, but that didn't stop one man from getting his apples to Polson. In 1940, the lake froze solid, and Earl Mozzie loaded his 1.5-ton truck with apples and drove across Woods Bay to Polson to make a delivery. We are heading next across Woods Bay to the Sitting Duck and Raven Bar, but first let's visit with some other birds. These are baby swallows. The swallows come every year to the Flathead Valley to build nests and raise their young. Watch closely as mom comes in to feed them and then split. There are 75 species of swallows, and they feed mostly on insects. And this handsome dude already has peach fuzz. The Sitting Duck is on the east shore of Woods Bay. Next door is the Raven Pub and Grill and Raven Brewing.
From the deck of the Raven Pub, while having lunch with a microbrew, you get a great view of Flathead Lake looking south toward Polson and west overlooking Yenny Point, which Jesse Yenny homesteaded in 1900 and cut the first road to the Woods Bay area.
Neil Brown is the owner and brewmaster of Raven Brewing. This microbrewery was established in 1996. Here, Neil is testing a sample of the fermenting beer. The process from brew kettle to tap takes from 14 days to 3 months, but it's worth the wait. You can visit the Raven either by boat or car. As we continue south along the east shore, at mile marker 24, the Flathead Lake reveals to us just how massive this body of water is. Crane Creek is only one of the many tributaries that flow from Crane Mountain into Flathead Lake, and the Bear Dance hiking trail will take you 5 miles up the Crane Mountain. These cherries are being graded, processed, and packed for shipping at Bowman's Orchards. During peak season, Bowman's Orchards has approximately 50 employees to pick and pack their cherries for mail orders all over the country. Their cherries are mostly Lambert's and Rainier. Marilyn Bowman also makes jams and syrups for commercial sales. In the 1920s, Adam Bowman cleared this land with block, tackle, and horses to create space for his cherry trees. By 1985, there were nearly 2,000 cherry orchards in Flathead and Lake counties. The hard freeze of 1989 almost wiped out the cherry industry. This and the increasing population's need for housing has caused considerable decline in the number of cherry orchards. There are still some beautiful orchards in pristine estate settings overlooking Flathead Lake. The sweet cherry industry began around 1929 when Oscar Moen planted a small cherry orchard near Yellow Bay. Moen, along with the Robin brothers, started the first commercial cherry raising venture on the east shore of Flathead Lake. Rudy and Hector Robin cleared acres of land just north of Yellow Bay and planted 350 Bings and Lambert's cherry trees. The Robin brothers patiently watched their trees grow, and in about 5 years, the fruits of their efforts began to pay off. An average cherry tree's life is 25 to 30 years. It takes a lot of pollen-spreading bees to produce a good cherry crop. The July harvest is one of the best times to drive along the east shore of Flathead Lake. There are numerous cherry stands waiting for you to sample their varieties. The Montana Biological Station Summer School of Science was established in 1899 by Dr. J. Martin Elrod. The first site was on the Swan River in Big Fork, but later moved to Yellow Bay, where it is today. Today, the University of Montana Biological Station is a year-round operation that has one of the most modern freshwater research laboratories in the United States. and this is their classroom. And sometimes they encounter strange creatures like the Flathead Lake monster. The Holiday Resort in Yellow Bay is a perfect spot for the rare sightings of that incredible monster. Blue Bay is a great place to scuba dive in the crystal blue waters of Flathead Lake. The first white men to enter the Flathead area were fur traders. The date was March 1st, 1812, when David Thompson and his party climbed a knoll and became the first white man to view the majestic beauty of Flathead Lake. His assistant was Jocko Finley, and the Jocko River, which is located a few miles south of the Flathead Valley, was named in honor of this popular fur trader. One of his grandsons was Powell Finley, a shrewd Indian who delighted in horse trading with the white man. What you are looking at is Finley Point, named after Powell Finley, who resided in this area. In 1935, a cherry growers co-op was organized to facilitate the packing, hauling, and marketing of cherries. In 1984, on Finley Point, this became the main packing plant for the cherry industry. The Finley Point State Park is a 28-acre park secluded in a conifer forest near the south end of Flathead Lake. Lake trout and yellow perch fishing is often excellent in this area. There are 16 slips for boats up to 25 feet long available for rent with each 40-foot RV campsite. Maximum stay at each state park campground is 7 days. This is truly one of the most scenic places to camp on the largest natural freshwater lake west of the Mississippi. Here is another bay on the north end of Finley Point. There are a few homes in this area, and the terrain varies considerably. The northeast side has spectacular sheer cliffs and crystal clear coves. Finley Point is part of the Flathead Indian Reservation. On July the 16th, 1855, an agreement was drawn up and signed by the United States government and 3 Indian tribes, creating the Flathead Indian Reservation. The 3 tribes were the Pend d'Oreille, Kootenai, and Salish Indians. The reservation has a total area of 1,243,969 acres. It is approximately 80 miles long and 40 miles wide. The northern boundary cuts through the middle of Flathead Lake. The gradual development of this lake began millions of years ago when the Rocky Mountains rose as a result of pressure in the Earth's crust. Then, during the Ice Age that occurred between 70,000 and 130,000 years ago, this Rocky Mountain trench was filled by huge glaciers moving south into the Flathead Valley. Geologists believe this glacier was 6,000 feet at the Canadian border. This is part of the northern end of the Mission Mountain Range that borders the eastern side of the Flathead Indian Reservation. Years before the invasion of the white settlers, the Flathead area was a paradise for the Native American Indians. Working in harmony with nature and not upsetting its balance, the Indians were blessed by the Great Spirit, for they lived in a haven for wild game and the lakes and rivers were well supplied with fish. When the buffalo disappeared from the plains, the suffering among the Plains Indians was severe. However, the Flathead tribes fared better because of their adaptability to life in the mountains and valleys. Eventually, they were encouraged by the white man to replace their hunting way of life by means of agriculture. This was not an easy transformation for the Flathead Indians because they were skilled hunters of mountain sheep, deer, and elk, not farmers. The Flatheads were once part of a larger group from the Pacific coast known as the Salish. These native Indians who first inhabited the region were proud of the area, which was a wild game paradise. When David Thompson, the fur trader and explorer, arrived in 1812, he was also spellbound by the Mission Mountain Range and Flathead Lake. His surveys and reports of emotional ecstasy started an influx of travelers to the Flathead country. In July of 1909, immigration reached its peak when over 81,000 people registered for homestead land on the reservation. This haystacker is a monument to the agriculture backbone of the valley. The south shore of the Flathead Lake offers the perfect climate for horticulture. Many homes are graced with constantly flowering annuals in hanging baskets, pots, beds, and borders. Geraniums are a very popular flower of the Flathead Valley because they bloom all summer long. Lobelia plants are a favorite because of their intense blue flowers. Fuchsia is a tropical genus with many cultivated varieties. Interesting buds and various flower forms provide the gardener with a multitude of selections. For instance, note the different combination of sepals and petals between this flower and this one. Fuchsias are preferred by bird lovers because they attract hummingbirds. Of course, who can forget the petunias? The farmlands need moisture, and even with so much water in Flathead Lake, it is still a precious resource that requires regulation with irrigation. Average rainfall is 14.5 inches, and the growing season is 130 days. This is part of the Polson Moraine, which is the result of glacial activity in the area during the Ice Age. The view from this fairway overlooking Flathead Lake is something to write home about. The Polson Country Club is a popular destination golf course for residents and visitors of the upper Flathead Valley. Golfing in Polson dates back to the 1930s. The original clubhouse is now home to the community theater productions and was built as a federal WPA project. For many years, golfers dreamed of adding to the first 9 holes. That dream became a reality in July of 1989. The 18 holes winter well and are generally ready for play earlier than other courses in western Montana. The magnificent views of the lake and the Mission Mountains make this course a golfer's paradise. The Quatatnuck Resort at Flathead Bay in Polson has 112 rooms, bar, restaurant, and boat rentals. Most of the rooms have views overlooking the blue waters of Flathead Lake. Fishing is good, and the water is fairly shallow in this southern part of the lake. Depths vary in Polson Bay from 18 feet to 28 feet, all the way to Bull Island and through the Narrows in that direction. Quatatnuck is owned by the Salish and Kootenai tribe. Quatatnuck means where the water leaves the lake. The resort features many events during the summer, including a craft pavilion. Jet skis and boat rentals are available here, and the Port Polson Princess has daily cruises and departs from downtown Polson between June and September. Between the Salish and Kootenai tribes, Lake County and the city of Polson government is the area's largest single employer. However, there is very little support in Lake County for big government. Before the Polson Bridge was built, steamboats played a major part in early transportation of freight and passengers. This bridge crosses where the lake channels into what was once a canyon and the place of falling waters. After Kerr Dam was completed, this canyon filled with water and is considerably deep. To give you an idea as to how deep this canyon is, Kerr Dam is 54 feet higher than Niagara Falls. There is the Polson Bridge in the distance on the west shore, and the Mission Mountain Range along the east shoreline. Nearly 2 miles from the bridge is Kerr Dam. Kerr Dam is located where the Indians' sacred place of falling waters once existed. Kerr Dam is the largest electrical generating power plant in the Montana Power Company system with a total capacity of 180,000 kilowatts. Kerr Dam stands 54 feet taller than Niagara Falls. That makes it 204 feet high. The arch of this mammoth structure was designed for strength and is anchored deep in the rock cliffs. There is over 1 million acre-feet of water stored behind the dam. The lake elevation is kept between 2,883 and 2,893 feet above sea level. Today, Kerr Dam churns out more than 1 billion kilowatts of power yearly. With only a 10-foot fluctuation between low pool and full pool, this body of water is the largest natural freshwater lake west of the Mississippi. Construction began in 1930 on Kerr Dam and employed 1,200 men. The first phase was completed in 1938. Even though the town of Polson was incorporated in 1910, the Salish-speaking people have been living on the shores of Flathead Lake for at least 5,000 years. The Polson Flathead Historical Museum was opened to the public in 1973. It features displays of homesteaders' lifestyles, Indian artifacts, surrey and carriage, and old gun collections. This Scottish Highland steer was used as draft labor during the early pioneer settlement of Montana. The museum has 6,000 square feet of interior space. You can find fascinating facts about the rugged homesteaders, steamboaters, and cattle ranchers, plus a photo history of the construction of Kerr Dam and the valley. This may look like a creature out of the prehistoric era, but it was actually caught in Flathead Lake as recently as 1955. This 7.5-foot monster could be just one of the babies. Mom and Pop may still be out there. To get an idea of how big he is, compare his size to the buffalo and elusive speed goat. Frequent sightings still occur in various parts of the lake. But unless you believe in monsters lurking in the depths, most sightings turn out to be just floating logs. Along the waters of the western shore stand monuments to the Ice Age and monuments to civilization. On the east side, the Golden West Lodge was built in the early 1900s. From the 1930s to the 1950s, it was a girls' camp. A new boat dock has been added, and the lodge is now a private residence that blends with its surroundings. Many people have made the effort to bring the old and run-down places back to life around the Flathead. The Flathead Lake is a result of the 60-million-year-old Rocky Mountain Trench, which starts in the Yukon Territory. A tremendous glacier filled this trench during the last ice age, with a river of ice thousands of feet thick and 20 to 30 miles wide. Where present-day Big Fork, Montana sits at the north end of the Mission Mountain Range, the glacier was split like a log, sending one river of ice down the Swan River Valley and the other to the west, forming the Flathead Lake. Another section of ice was divided by Wild Horse Island, sending a mass of ice through that gap in the mountains known today as the Big Arm. As the climate warmed, the glacier melted and deposited large amounts of sediment and debris just south of Polson. The sediment dammed the waters to form a body of water that was 500 feet higher than today's Flathead Lake. There was actually a steamboat era on Flathead Lake that began around 1883. It lasted until the 1920s, but not without a few disasters. Violent late summer storms would cause ocean-like waves to pound a stern wheeler until a skipper lost control and his ship was grounded or sunk. The enormous size of the lake has an intimidating effect on most of the boaters, and sometimes you feel like you are the only boat on the lake. Flathead Lake was once part of a much grander lake, and next I would like to show you an excerpt from a geological video produced by Washington State University in cooperation with the Kerr Dam National Recreation Area. This is some earth-shattering information, and I wish that all of you peckerheads would watch and listen closely.
The volcanic fires were followed by the deep freeze of the Ice Age. Little more than 15,000 years ago, the continental ice sheet crept southward into the Pacific Northwest. A finger of the ice sheet reached into the Idaho Panhandle, blocking the mouth of the Clark Fork River. It created an ice dam half a mile high, and as water backed up into the deep mountain valleys of western Montana, it began to form an enormous lake. Lake Missoula stretched for hundreds of miles and was at least 2,000 feet deep. It contained 500 cubic miles of water, as large as some of today's Great Lakes. At 2,000 feet, it was deeper than any lake in the United States today. Faint shorelines etched into the mountains above the city of Missoula, Montana, show that even that far east, the lake was nearly 1,000 feet deep. No other glacial lake has been so deep against its dam. No glacially dammed lake as large as Lake Missoula has stood so high above the country downstream. But the ice dam could only temporarily restrain such an immense volume of water. When the water reached its maximum depth, it burst through the ice barrier, shooting out of Clark Fork Canyon at a rate 10 times the combined flow of all the rivers of the world. At that rate, the lake would have drained in as little as 48 hours. As the water raced toward the ocean, it reached speeds in excess of 65 miles per hour. This mass of water and ice literally shook the ground as it thundered across the countryside. The roar would have been audible for at least half an hour before the flood struck. The floodwaters carved out over 50 cubic miles of earth from western Montana to the Pacific Ocean.
The Great Floods, or Lake Missoula floods, occurred as recently as 15,000 years ago. Flathead Lake was part of that 500 cubic miles of water. Today, as we fly over the southern part of the lake, we are in for a visual treat as the Mission mountain range stands majestically along the east shore. Flying north out of Polson Bay and overlooking the west shore, the terrain begins to take on a different look. This is Big Arm Bay. University of Montana Biological Station studies of the Flathead Lake bottom indicate a branch of deep water extending westward along a trench from 5 miles in the lake to Big Arm. Geological studies show an abandoned river valley 13 miles long and 1 to 2 miles wide that crosses the lower end of the Salish mountain range. The first lake outlet was in this region. An arm of ice mass was pushed out westward through a gap in the mountains extending west from present-day Big Arm and Elmo. After the ice melted, the lake outlet flowed down the Big Draw west of Elmo. The first lake outlet followed this course, merging in the area of Dixon, Montana with the great body of water known as Lake Missoula. Highway 93 traverses the west shore of Flathead Lake and will eventually take you to the town of Summers on the north end of the lake and continue to Kalispell. This 500 acres is Cromwell Island, and it is privately owned. It is located just southeast of Dayton along Highway 93. The Blackfeet Indians used to make horse raids on their enemy, the Kootenai tribe. It seems the Kootenai retaliated by stealing even more horses from the Blackfeet and hid them on the island. That's where it gets its name, Wild Horse Island. The Hell Gate Treaty of 1855 established the Flathead Indian Reservation. The treaty was to guarantee the sovereignty of the reservation and independence of its people. The Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes surrendered some 21 million acres of ancestral lands to the U.S. government, but kept 1.3 million for their homeland, and Wild Horse Island was part of that deal. Then came the Homestead Act that was passed by Congress in 1862, but the Flathead Valley wasn't mostly surveyed until the 1880s. When the Dawes Act passed in 1887, it said the reservation would be open to white settlement, but the best lands to be allotted to the Indians. Wild Horse Island was part of that allotment. Some of the island not claimed by the Indians was open to homesteading in 1910. Villa sites of from 2 to 5 acres were planted. Wild Horse Island is 2,163 acres. Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks now manage the island. With only 56 privately owned parcels, most of the island is a state park. Just south of these two islands is the north boundary of the Flathead Indian Reservation. Is this Angel Point? If you know, call me. If you wish to learn more about Flathead Lake, I recommend reading Flathead Lake From Glaciers to Cherries by R.C. Chuck Robin. Sitting below Blacktail Mountain is Lakeside. Homesteaders arrived here in the late 1890s. Orchards were started around 1901 in this area and survived until the hard freeze of 1924. A ski area is proposed for Blacktail Mountain in the near future. As we fly along the north shore of Flathead Lake, the town of Somers comes into view. There is one last bit of information that I wish to share with you before we complete our tour. I think you'll find this very interesting. In 1943, there was a big fight over turning Flathead Lake into a reservoir. Here's the gist of that story. It seems that the War Production Board, along with the U.S. Corps of Engineers and the Bonneville Power Administration, proposed to raise the high water level of Flathead Lake by 17 feet in 1945, and eventually 37 feet. That plan would have put the shoreline somewhere around Kalispell. And here, where the Flathead River flows, would have been the lake. The rationale was to furnish additional power capacity to Grand Coulee and Bonneville dams along the lower Columbia River. Power for the war effort and water storage for the drought years was the reason given. However, at the time, the people of Montana had no way of knowing that the proposed rise in the lake level was part of a defense plan. The manufacturing of plutonium for the atomic bomb was secretly taking place downstream at Hanford, Washington, and required an abundance of electricity. Nestled on the foothills of the Swan Mountain Range and situated at the mouth of the Swan River is the village of Big Fork. The mountains are starting to accumulate a frozen reservoir of water that will eventually flow into Flathead Lake and over Kerr Dam. Flathead Lake began as a glacier and ends at a place of falling waters.